Up to 7,000 prisoners are being released early from September, and this time, unlike every previous scheme, there are no exclusions. Rapists, sex offenders, killers. It does not matter what you were sentenced for.
I've come to a terrible conclusion. Britain is no longer a safe place for women and children.
Rochdale grooming gang leader Shabir Ahmed has been moved from his accommodation after its location was revealed on social media. Ahmed was released on licence 2 weeks ago.
They've let 60,000 criminals out of jail early. They're abolishing short-term sentences, so almost all shoplifters and the majority of knife criminals will no longer be sent to prison.
Pure disgust. An Afghan migrant who raped a 17-year-old schoolgirl is being released early under Labour's soft on crime scheme.
Are you out on early release?
Yeah.
Do you know where you're going? Did they set it all out before you got out of prison when you was in there? Oh, that's nice, Keir Starmer, isn't it? Sweet voice.
Keir Starmer?
He's the Prime Minister.
Oh.
He's the one that got you out? Yeah.
Respect to him, man.
What was you in for?
Theft.
No.
What are you doing? What are you doing? No, Simon, don't do that, Simon. Don't, Simon, no. Magazine, don't do that. Simon.
Where's Sister Sever?
Hey, Simon, serious. You know where you're going?
Gang leader Shabir Ahmed has been released from HMP Leeds. I am from Bury, which is right next to Rochdale. So in 2012, when all of this news broke and this guy went to prison, I remember this asshole because this guy not only was like one of the ringleaders of this entire grooming gang, he also made these girls call him daddy. This guy's a sicko. So in 2012, he was sentenced to 24 years and he's just been released, meaning that he's served 14 years. This guy has tried to apply for parole 3 times and been denied 3 times because the parole board concluded that he still represents a significant high risk to the public. Now, if you've seen the news, you might have seen politicians in talks about how to deport this guy back to his native Pakistan. And it will come as no surprise that I actually don't think that's the issue here. But before you go off at me in the comments, hear me out. One of the reasons that he can't be deported is because he came before the year 1971. So he has been here for at least 50 years. He came over when he was a small child. I'm not going to lie, I think that makes him our problem. This isn't some guy that's just arrived. This is a guy that spent pretty much his entire life here, and to be honest, I don't see why Pakistan should have to deal with him. But I understand people not wanting him living in our communities. I also don't want this guy living in our communities, but I don't think the issue is one about deportation. I don't think the conversation should be one about deportation. I think the conversation should be about our legal system, specifically our prison system, and how it's a mess. This guy applied for parole 3 times and was deemed too much of a risk to the public to be let go. He refused to consider what he had done as being wrong, and he basically thought that the victims deserved it. He refused to engage with rehabilitation programs in prison. So this guy is actively refusing treatment. The parole board have deemed this guy a risk to the public. Why is he on the streets then? Well, because in this country, apparently, you are automatically eligible for release when you have served 2/3 of your sentence. So instead of serving his 22 years, he will just automatically be released after 14 years.
Welcome to Blighty Blighted, your daily reminder that if the justice system starts running out of room, ordinary people are bound to start asking difficult questions. Now then, can we have a serious conversation? Because one issue that's been troubling a lot of people is the pressure on Britain's prisons. You hear about prisons reaching capacity. You hear about overcrowding. You hear about prisoners being released earlier under government policies designed to manage space. And many people quite naturally ask, how on earth did we get here? The first thing to say is this. Most people accept that prisons should punish offenders. They should also help reduce the chances of people committing further crimes after they're released. Those 2 goals matter. But confidence in the system depends on people believing that justice is being carried out fairly, and that public safety comes first. When governments announce measures to ease pressure on prisons by releasing some prisoners earlier than previously planned, it's understandable that people have questions, especially if they worry about serious offenders returning to the community before expected. Nothing undermines confidence faster than people thinking the system is being driven by a lack of space instead of the interests of justice. So, why are prisons under pressure? There isn't one simple answer. Britain has seen changes in sentencing over the years.
Many of you will have seen the video doing the rounds of Shabana Mahmood
and Wes Streeting, both Labour cabinet members, laughing yesterday about the early release scheme. We should be getting 10,000 foreign criminals out of our prisons, sent back to where they came from, and make sure that these vile criminals, the rapists, the grooming gang members, and the people that killed PC Harper remain in prison for the full length of their sentences. It's an utter disgrace that cabinet members, Labour cabinet members, should find this in any which way amusing, because the rest of us are not amused by this.
Prisoners in Scotland are now going to be released early from prison automatically once they've served 30% of their prison sentence. Now, I should say for clarity, this only applies to those prisoners who have received a custodial sentence of 4 or less years. It will not apply to LTPs, and it will also not apply to those prisoners who have received custodial sentences for crimes of a sexual nature or of a domestic nature. Now, this replaces the previous 40% that had to be served, and essentially it's the government's attempt to reduce the ever-rising prison populations here in Scotland. Came into place on the 12th of this month, I believe. I found it pretty interesting, so I thought I'd share with you guys. So yeah, hope you'll have a lovely weekend. Love you, bye.
After he served 14 years in jail since his conviction in 2012 for multiple rape and sexual offences against young girls. He is subject to a string of licence conditions, including staying at approved accommodation staffed 24 hours a day. But the disclosure of the address in Accrington caused local uproar.
Did you know that UK prisons are overflowing? And at least 33% of prisoners are now getting early releases. Right now, UK prisons are in one of the biggest overcrowding crises in modern history. For years, more people have been sent to prison than there are spaces available. To stop prisons from completely running out of space, the government put forward a new sentencing strategy. Under the new Sentencing Act 2026, prisoners can now become eligible for early release after serving just a third of their sentence, but only if they earn it through good behaviour, work and education, and through engaging with rehabilitation programmes. So it's not just an automatic release. The most serious offenders won't be eligible for this and will remain subject to stricter release rules. But even after release, offenders are still on licence. They can be electronically tagged and monitored by probation and sent straight back to prison if they break their licence conditions. Supporters say this prevents the prison system from collapsing and encourages rehabilitation. Critics argue that dangerous offenders are being released too early. But what do you think the real solution is? I think they should just build more prisons.
Britain, wake up. The government has announced that from September, some serious offenders, including certain killers, rapists and sex offenders, will become eligible for early release as part of the efforts to deal with prison overcrowding. Think about that for a second. Victims and their families were told justice would be served. Now, because the prison system is under pressure, sentences can effectively become shorter for some of the country's most dangerous criminals. What message does that send? That if prisons are full, justice becomes negotiable. People deserve to feel safe, victims deserve confidence. That sentence means what the court has intended. Instead, we're being told electronic tags and supervision will fill the gap. Whether you support Labour or not, this should concern everyone. The real solution is fixing the prison system, expanding capacity where needed, and making sure serious offenders serve the sentences the public expects. Justice should never depend on whether there's enough space in a prison. If we agree, it's time to demand better. Britain deserves better.
And they're pretending they're doing these things because they have to, but they're doing them because they want to. The prisons minister says only a third of prisoners should be locked up. Labour just don't have it in their DNA to be tough on crime. No. They sometimes forget that their job is to prevent and punish crime.
He has served just 4 years of a 9-year sentence. The Home Office promised to deport him, yet they failed to do so. As a result, he is now free to walk our streets, posing a further threat to others. The victim's mother has called it a travesty of justice, and it is hard to disagree. This is a real betrayal of every woman and child in Britain.
We would like to ask to subscribe to our channel for daily news like this, the ones mass media does not report.
Now, the Justice Secretary has confirmed that those convicted of rape and serious sex offences will now be released halfway through their sentence, rather than 2/3. Now, someone sentenced to 15 years for rape will now be out in 7.5 years, and those convicted of burglary, theft and assault will be out after a third. Now, a solicitor who works with rape victims every day described this as a downgrade in the status of victims this week, saying his clients already find it almost impossible to come forward, to get through the system, to reach a conviction. And now they are watching those same offenders handed an early exit. Now, I've already covered how courts are now legally required to suspend sentences of 12 months or less, meaning people who assault or harass you may not go to prison at all. And now the people who are in prison are coming out early. Now, at some point, you have to ask what message this sends to anyone sitting with the question of whether it is even worth reporting in the first place. It's worth thinking about.
I'll ask you about a different story. Shabir Ahmed, the criminal who has been released, involved in the Rochdale grooming gangs, key to it, against the wishes of the victims, and now the government wants to deport him back to Pakistan. Last night they signed off £153 million in aid for Pakistan. People are outraged at that because they see it as a potential way to put pressure on Pakistan to take this criminal back. What's your view on it?
Well, I'm outraged at this man's crimes as well. And actually yesterday I met with Steve Gillen, who is actually the General Secretary of the Prisons Officers Association, so the people who are in charge of running our prisons. And he spoke at length about the overcrowding in our prisons. And often you have people in prisons for crimes. You have women, for instance, who have stole baby food and nappies. Now, look, I want everyone to obey the law. But it's clear, if we're releasing people who have committed crimes like this, and if they're still a threat, then we shouldn't be releasing them from our prisons. They should still be contained exactly where they are.
On the subject of pressurising Pakistan to take them back, do you agree that we should withhold such a significant aid package as part of that process?
Well, it doesn't make sense to me that you trade off aid with diplomatic relationships. Ultimately, what we need to make sure is that we have safeguards in place so we can both keep people in prisons in Britain, if they're British, especially when they've committed heinous crimes, and also make sure that we have good relationships with other countries about people who come here and indeed people who go and live over there too. I don't think we should be making these on a case-by-case basis. I think we need to have consistency and also make sure we stick to the rule of law.
So I'm not sure, would you deport him and go by any means necessary or not?
Well, as I say, that would require a threat assessment. And if he is still a threat, then he shouldn't be out of prison at all.
Well, the victims say he is a threat.
Right, and he committed those crimes in Britain, so it makes sense to me that as a British citizen, he stays in a British prison. I accept there may be more detail that I'm not privy to. I'm not, the Justice Minister or in the Home Office.
You wouldn't deport him then, and you wouldn't withhold aid as a result of that?
Well, if he's still a threat, it doesn't make diplomatic sense to me for him to go be a threat somewhere else. It makes sense to me that he's maintained in prison until he's not a threat.
He hasn't got British nationality anymore. That was removed, wasn't it? That was one thing they could do, but they can't force Pakistan to take him back. So what would you do if you were in government in this particular dilemma?
Well, I think the first thing to make sure is that our prisons aren't overcrowded, and the way we do that is by reprioritising.
Different problem, though, isn't it? That's what all governments want to do.
Well, I think you can't silo these things, and actually, if you invest in our prison system and make sure that there is space for people who need to be kept in the prison because they're unsafe, but also make sure that we're looking at prevention, so people aren't committing so-called lower order crimes, and making sure that they're kept in the community, there'd be more space, so you wouldn't end up in situations like this where you have incredibly difficult decisions. It's all a consequence of austerity, and ultimately what we need to be doing is taxing multimillionaires and billionaires so we have enough money in our economy to make sure we're investing in things like our prison system.
Soft touch Britain is getting worse. Do you remember PC Andrew Harper? He was dragged over a mile to his death while trying to protect the public. Most people remember the sheer horror of that case. And now we're being told that two of the men convicted over his killing could be eligible for early release under the government's prison release scheme. So hold on, let's get this straight. A police officer loses his life in the line of duty. His family gets a life sentence of grief. Yet the people responsible, who were only jailed in 2020, could potentially be walking free years earlier than many expected. Andrew's mum has described it as an insult beyond words, and it's hard to argue with that. Imagine what that must feel like. The government argues these measures are necessary because prisons are overcrowded. That's just not a good enough reason, in my opinion. There are other options. Remove foreign offenders for one. Look, justice should never be compromised because the system's run out of space. So where do you stand? If someone's convicted over the death of a police officer carrying out his duty, should early release ever be on the table? Or is this another example of victims and their families coming second? Let me know, because personally, I think even considering early release in this case is just pathetic.
Is our government taking the piss? Are they seriously taking the piss? David Lammy has just signed the order to release up to 6,000 prisoners. The first 700 are going to be released in September. And they will include people who have unalived people, rapists and sex offenders. Some of these people will not even have served half of their sentence. Some of them only a third. But no, all right lads, you're all right now, come on out, it's fine. Because they can't cope with the chaos that they've created. Prisons are too full. So why don't we just let everybody out? Where is the justice for the victims? Where? Is it hiding? Is it behind the sofa? Is it under the pillow? No, it needs to be in prison where it should be. Because there needs to be consequences for actions. What is this message sending to people? Doesn't matter, you can go and do what the feck you want. We'll let you out anyway. Doesn't matter, off you pop lads, easy bit of cash, you'll probably get out. Where you go? Seriously, 6,000 of these people will be released in the next year. What the fuck?
Shabir Ahmed is being released from jail. This is the same man who was sentenced to 22 years for being one of the leaders of the Rochdale grooming gangs. A man who raped and trafficked young British girls while the authorities did nothing. And now he's being let out. How is this justice? These girls were failed by everyone who's supposed to protect them. The police, the social services, and more importantly, the government. They were too scared of being called racist to do their jobs. And because of that, hundreds of girls had their lives destroyed. This isn't just one case. This is happening across our country. And it makes me ask the question, who is really pulling the strings? Because something is deeply wrong with Britain. We've got convicted rapists being released while the victims are ignored. We've got mass immigration, changing our country without our consent. We've got two-tier policing, and a system that seems to protect certain groups while throwing our own people to the wolves. Who benefits from all of this? Because sure as hell isn't the British people. I fought for this country, I lost brothers for this country, and I will not stay silent while the very fabric of Britain is being torn apart within. Something is not right, and it's time we started asking who is really in control.
My biggest fear with all this is that we're on the verge of a massive crime wave.
I wonder what both of you make of the fact that the government seem to think child rapists, groomers, exploiters, sexual abusers are not necessarily serious offenders by this definition.
I think they may be referring to the early release schemes that we've introduced since the beginning of the year, not this legislation. This legislation is clear. A standard determinate sentence is eligible for release at the third point of their sentence. And let's be honest, the early release schemes haven't helped because for every 4 prisoners we release, 3 of them come back, they either breach the licence or they reoffend. But probation staff are being told now, under no circumstances, unless it's extremely serious and there's a risk to the public, do you recall prisoners? So this is all going under the radar, and the public need to wake up and challenge this because we need to do things better. There's an easier way to reduce the prison population, and that's to invest in services in our communities, in robust community sentences, and invest in the probation service so they can monitor people.
I mean, the government are talking about hundreds of millions they're spending on the probation service, recruiting huge numbers of probation officers.
Recruiting staff doesn't happen overnight. They have to be interviewed, they have to pass assessments, they have to be vetted, they have to be trained. So now you've got a really inexperienced probation workforce who are only new to the risks that they're supposed to assess. So it's all going to take time. My biggest fear with all this is that we're on the verge of a massive crime wave, because I don't think there's support services in place for people we're releasing.
Why do I say that? Figures released today all over the front pages of our newspapers. 26,000 prisoners released early by this government this year alone. What's more worrying, hundreds of them had prison sentences of 14 years or more or 10 years or more. That means they are really serious, hardened criminals who are now out and free. Some of them are violent offenders, some of them are sex offenders, some of them are domestic abuse offenders. Who did the sex offenders go for? Who did the domestic abuse offenders go for? Women and children. That's why I'm saying to you, is Britain any longer a safe place for women and children? I'm not sure it is. Reform UK today had a press conference with all women mayors and councillors, and they said exactly the same. This country isn't safe any longer for women or their children. Yet Keir Starmer, our Prime Minister, has the flipping cheek to put out on social media today in a tweet, if you come to this country and break the law, you will be deported as soon as possible. What does that mean? Next week? Next month? Next year? Because in the next breath they have to admit, yes, they can appeal, and yes, they can use the Human Rights Act, and yes, of course, they can use legal aid, which means you, the taxpayer, will be paying for their wretched defence. I'm asking again, is Britain safe for our women and children? Do you think it is? It doesn't feel it to me.
Oh, Labour's early release scheme is back, where they release violent offenders and horrific people early from prison. And yet again, nobody is going to reveal the true figure of how many. Have a look at this clip.
How many paedophiles, rapists and grooming gang members are going to be let out of prison early under this government's sentencing reforms in September?
Well, look, the full numbers are going to be set out in due course. So I don't have those numbers for you today.
Well, the Tories
what
put it
we
about
have set out in the
6,000.
Sentencing Act is... Well, I don't know where they've got that figure from, but look, we've said very clearly that the prison places that we need to save are around 7,500.
So here's my question to Labour, okay? Because they clearly don't know. The guy said the figures will be put out in due course, and he said they think it will be 7,500, okay? Hypothetically, okay? Does anybody know how many people from Labour's last release have gone on to reoffend? I could swear there's stories hanging around of people who have gone on to reoffend from this. Now, if Labour are releasing people who have done petty crimes like shoplifting from a supermarket, things like that, then potentially fair enough. But if they've gone on to do things like murder, rape, you name it, they should not be let out early. What are we doing here? What are we doing here? They're going to turn this country, which is already lawless, into Gotham City 2.0. Yeah, I'm waiting for the figures.
So, behind me here is an extract from the beginning of an article produced today. I just want to highlight these two words here. This is in relation to new guidance that has been brought in based on the Texas prison system's principles, as we can't duplicate it. It's based on those principles to assist with the overcrowding of the prison system. However, as that caption says, it's very misleading because it does not apply to people with murder sentences, IPP sentences, because they are not standard determinate sentences. They are indeterminate sentences, such as IPP who have no release date, and also with joint enterprise prisoners who serve most of the time life in prison. So please do not be fooled by that caption. It does not refer to killers unless you have a manslaughter sentence, and also IPP prisoners. It does not apply to them. So if you have more of a determinate sentence, but it's still a serious crime, you'll be released halfway through. That is essentially what this article is trying to tell us. However, using the word killer, rapist and other serious criminals, if you use that in the first part, it's very clickbait. It's so misleading, and I know a lot of people had a lot of hope just from reading that first part of the article, which is so sad to see. It's sad to see that IPPs were not considered. It's sad to see joint enterprise prisoners were not considered, because if they were targeted primarily, there would be a lot less of the overcrowding in our prison system.
because I do think one of the things that would help the overcrowding system immensely within our prison systems is if we look at why are we still imprisoning people under IPP but just under a different name, and we are just sentencing people to indeterminate sentences for non-serious crimes. And second of all, why are we still putting people away for murder when they didn't lay a finger on anyone, when they weren't at the scene of the crime and they didn't really understand what was going on? I think if we resolved that issue first of all, we'd have a lot less of an overcrowding prison system on our hands.
Shabir Ahmed is back on the streets of Rochdale. For the people living there, that's a sentence that carries a lot of weight. Ahmed was the ringleader of a grooming gang and was convicted of 30 child rape offences. Even one of those should mean the only way he ever leaves prison is in a box. He's 73 years old now, and on Thursday the 2nd of July he was released from prison. The reaction was almost instant. By today, Friday the 3rd of July, reports started coming in of a group known as the Rochdale Lads assembling for street patrols. Billy Howarth is a campaigner for Parents Against Grooming UK. He didn't hold back when talking about Ahmed either, describing him as a figure of intense public condemnation. It's gotten to the point where Greater Manchester Police are now on standby to monitor the situation, so more taxpayer money wasted on this lowlife. Now here's the part that's really fueling the anger. The British government has already stripped Ahmed of his British citizenship because of what he did. He's not a British citizen. Chris Philp, the Shadow Home Secretary, has been very clear that he thinks Ahmed should be urgently deported back to Pakistan. That's his country of birth and original nationality. But he's still here in the UK. The reason is a loophole in the Immigration Act of 1971. That legislation is over half a century old. MPs are now arguing that the Act simply wasn't designed to deal with modern cases of sexual exploitation like this one. And now because of those specific provisions in a 50-year-old law, his deportation is currently blocked. Now, the Home Office has confirmed that Ahmed will be on the sex offenders register for life. He's also subject to electronic tagging and strict curfews and restriction zones. More admin, more taxpayer money wasted. This has sparked a massive political row. You've got Labour MPs Paul Way from Rochdale and Jim McMahon from Oldham both calling for the 1971 Act to be changed immediately. They want new legislation that allows for the deportation of foreign-born offenders in such heinous crimes. If the UK, a so-called sovereign nation, left the ECHR, it would certainly make it easy to get people like Ahmed out of the country. We've got basically a legal system that can decide someone doesn't deserve citizenship, but then finds itself unable to actively remove them. And it's left the residents of Rochdale feeling like they have to patrol their own streets, while the authorities stay on standby. When a law from 1971 is what's keeping a convicted ringleader in the country in 2026, you can see why the community and the country's at breaking point.
The day I found out I was going home early and I burst into tears. I know it might sound crazy, but you need to hear me out because I didn't expect to burst into tears myself. So by this point, I'd served 18 months, obviously on remand, up until the day of sentencing. I'd kind of been in acceptance of the sentence I'd got at this point. I had a release date in my head. Every day I'd structure. I had routine. I had qualifications lined up that I was going to be getting done, making use of my time. And yeah, then this curveball come in. Was it a curveball? At the time, it felt like a curveball. Then, yeah, I got a call into the office and I thought, oh my God, what's going on here? What have I done wrong? It automatically, my brain just goes to the worst. I think it was from everything I'd been through up until now. You kind of just programmed to think everything's going to be something bad. And my OMU worker, he was like, handed me this piece of paper, and it was the charge sheet that you get. Is it called a charge sheet? It's like a date with all your dates. It's a piece of paper with all your dates on, and everything says what you're eligible for. And yeah, there was a new date on there, and I was like, well, what's this? And he was like, what do you think it is? And he was like, you're currently on an SDS sentence, or you're eligible for SDS, which is
now you're asking me what it means. Something determined sentencing. Something like that. And yeah, there was a new release date on there, and it was like, how long was it? October, November, December, January, 6 months early release. And I thought, what? I thought, oh my God. Like, it was quite like, I just thought, oh my God, that's 6 months off. And in my head I was thinking I had all these qualifications that I wanted to complete, to leave and have purpose, to go home and do something useful with my life. And now you're here telling me that I'm going home early. My head just rolled off my shoulders. I burst into tears. It was like I'd become that at peace with myself and my life that I wasn't ready to hear this news. Like, it sounds mad, but I'm being truly honest. So, as you can imagine, I was in complete shock. Went back to my room and I rang my best friend, and I literally sobbed my heart out. And like, I think everyone expected me to be excited, like it was great news. My anxiety crept in, and prison had become my normal. I knew what every day looked like, Monday to Friday, Saturday to Sunday. Every week, every day was the same for me. And to know that I didn't know what the outside, I mean, like, you do actually just choose to block out the outside. Like, you don't want to know what's going on outside anymore, because that's not your life at the minute. And the only way you're going to get through a prison sentence, and I'm telling you now, the only way I got through it was forgetting about the outside world, still keeping in contact with my family and my close friends and my loved ones. But yeah, it's just like, it's giving me goose pimples now, because in my head I had this release date and I wasn't ready to go home any sooner than what I had programmed in here. And it threw me, it completely took me off my feet. I was actually scared of freedom, and I'm not even ashamed to say it or lying, or it petrified me to know I was going home. Like, I had to go home and rebuild my life. Everything was just white. So the thought of coming home was scary, but then the thought of knowing, are people going to judge me because I had done wrong, I hold my hands up to it. It was a scary feeling. And the thought of no longer, like I said previously, when you go into prison, all you see is the surroundings, the gates, the fences, the barbed wire. The longer you're in there, they disappear. You no longer notice them. And the minute you leave, you need them back. Like, you need that security, you need that structure, you need that routine. It becomes comfort. And that is where I now know people become institutionalized, because it's a real thing. And that means, I'm not saying I loved prison. It means that I adapted to living there. I had to, I had no choice. So it became my life. And I think that thought of being told I was going home early, it weren't the fact of going home, it was the actual realization, you've got to start all over again. Where the fuck do you start? I remember going back to my cell, and I cried and cried my eyes out, even after I got on the phone and told my mom, my dad, my best friend, my sisters. I just wasn't ready. And I didn't want to stay in prison forever. But was I ready to have to make the norm a new norm? Because the prison become norm. But now I had to go home and do the normal again. Like, I don't think if anyone, you haven't been in that situation, and God forbid, I won't wish it on anybody, not even my worst enemy. But I just loved the routine. I loved everything about it. That I found was my way to go through my sentence. And it was the only way that...
Some offenders are serving longer sentences. The prison population has grown. Building enough prison places takes time and money. Court backlogs and wider pressures on the justice system all play a part. It's a complicated picture. You can't solve 20 years of pressure by wishing another prison wing into existence. Then there's another question people often raise. What happens to foreign nationals who commit crimes in Britain? Many members of the public believe that where the law allows, foreign national offenders should be removed from the UK after serving their sentence, while recognizing that individual cases are governed by legal processes and international obligations. That's a subject that generates plenty of debate. Whatever your politics, most people want the same basic things. Safe streets, a justice system that's fair, enough prison places for those who need to be there, and confidence that serious, violent offenders are dealt with appropriately under the law. Britain has one of the oldest legal traditions in the world. People rightly expect it to command public confidence. That means having enough capacity, enough resources and policies that balance punishment, rehabilitation, and public protection. The real scandal isn't that people are asking questions, it's that so many feel they have to. Because when confidence in the justice system begins to weaken, it's not just the prisons that need attention, it's public trust. Cheerio, and let's hope the only thing released early in Britain is tomorrow's weather forecast.